All right. She's actually in that room where the harp is. And so if you want to put it on speaker, maybe you'll be able to see her better. Where are you, Mary Jane?
I'm here.
Okay, there she is. All right. So I love that version of the prayer. It was so beautiful. And I'm so happy to have you. And basically, let's just get started with the first thing that you're at.
Okay.
The Debbie Reynolds story. Is that where we're going to start? Okay.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for inviting me to tell these wonderful stories. My husband Jim is going to do the camera work. So we've laid out the items all over the harp room, and as we hit each topic, he is going to photograph them. So back in 2011, Debbie Reynolds had collected a lot of costumes. She went to the 1970 MGM auction when MGM sold off everything, including the boat that was in Showboat. Okay, they cleared off their back lots. And Debbie was there, and she bought as much as she could. And so she always wanted a museum in Hollywood. For some reason, that never came to fruition. She had a small museum in Las Vegas, but honestly, the hotel was so small and the gallery was so small, she could only have about 100 items out. She owned thousands of costumes. So in 2011, she got crosswise with the IRS, and she decided to liquidate her collection to pay her tax bill, basically. So the first auction was in 2011, and I read about it in a magazine. And I told Jim, I said, you know, I was only in 8th grade in 1970 when they had the last one, and this one I'm not going to miss, because I guarantee you this stuff is going to go all over the world and we're never going to see it again. And that is exactly what happened. There were about 350 items in that first auction. The auction was held at the Paley Center. I'm going to go touch an iPad real quick for a picture. I want to show you a picture. Hang on just a second. Okay, so you can see in that picture in just a second, we are sitting in the audience at the Paley Center. And I had gone in and I had noticed there were a couple of seats roped off about on the 3rd row.
Okay, so wait, the auctioneer it's on Jim's phone, so you need to look on Jim Sinclair, right? Is that what you're wanting us to look at? So maybe click on him for a second so that you can see that. Go ahead. I just wanted to let him know if she's referring.
So I asked the auctioneer, I said, can we sit here? And he said, if you're really good. And then when he said that, I knew who was going to sit in those seats. And sure enough, about 10 minutes before the auction started, Debbie came in, Carrie came in. Todd's girlfriend is the blonde sitting next to Debbie. And there's a seat in between myself and the blonde. Her name is Kathleen Strickland. And Todd, her son, is up against the wall in a ball cap. Well, Todd came and sat next to me. And it was a day-long event. For the next day and a half, we had so much fun. The lady in the wheelchair on the end is Rosemarie.
Oh, yeah.
And she came. And that's Carrie in the dark hair. You can see the back of her now. You can see Debbie. Debbie actually had a light box in front of her seat. That's why she's all lit up. And she looked like a doll. You can see the light box right there. Debbie Reynolds was one of the kindest people I've ever had the chance to meet. She signed everyone's auction catalog. She spoke to everyone. She was just a doll. So the auction started off, and the bids are flying. And there was a Leslie Howard costume that I really wanted, but Jim is now showing you our bidder paddle. So we were 140 and 141. Okay, so there was a Leslie Howard costume I wanted, but it started really high, so I didn't have much faith in it, and it went off the chart, and it went to bidder number 249. Well, bidder number 249 bought up just about everything at that auction, including Marilyn Monroe's subway dress from a 7-Year Itch. So it turns out that man lived in South Korea, And he and his interpreter came to the auction, and they came to clean up, and they did. And so just like I thought, so many items from the golden screen that we are so familiar with are gone. They're out of our country. We don't know where they are. We don't even know if they'll ever be put in a museum, but they are gone. Well, the next couple of items came up, wasn't anything I was interested in. And then there came up a pair of earrings. So this pair of earrings they were worn by Norma Shearer in the movie Marie Antoinette. Marie Antoinette starred Norma Shearer and Tyrone Power. And it was the last production that Irving Thalberg was involved in before he died. So this was a very expensive production, and there are the earrings. So these come up, and of course they go off the chart. That little tag says something like $300 to $500. Well, that's just a jumping off point. Just forget about that. So these earrings are going up, 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 up. Mr. South Korea is bidding on these. And I basically turned to Todd and said, I give up. And then I put my last bid in, and Todd said to the auctioneer on the stage, give her a break. She lost her Leslie Howard costume. Give her a break. And the auctioneer slammed down the hammer and said, sold. And I looked at Jim and I said, how much? How much? Because it had gone so fast, I couldn't even remember the number at this point. So there they are. They are paste, which means rhinestone. They are foiled backed. You know how the old earrings were, they're foiled back. And the little earring part is a screw on. So those were a screw on earring that Norma Shearer wore, and she wears it in a major scene in Marie Antoinette. She is gifted with a beautiful necklace, and she's got these earrings on. So next time you watch Marie Antoinette, watch out for those earrings. And then she has a necklace that really matches it. You'll be able to notice it because of the necklace. So we had a wonderful time, and had it not been for Todd Fisher, I always tell everybody I would have never gotten those earrings. Now, Debbie had 2 more auctions, and I purchased costumes from her online through that. I had a phone bidder. There's a costume right behind me, and it's Leslie Howard's costume from Romeo and Juliet. And this came out of Debbie's auction as well, but it was an online. It wasn't the one we attended. And I'm going to turn this just a little bit. Can you see the detail on these sleeves? So this is gold thread, gold and silver thread. The buttons are literally made of pot metal. Literally all this was fashioned in the MGM costume shop. This is a heavy wool jersey. This is from Romeo and Juliet, also starring Norma Shearer. And this is Romeo's costume. Of course, Leslie Howard was always Romeo to me anyway. So other than Jim, of course, who's over here. But anyway, this is a great costume as well. But again, Debbie really wanted to save these costumes. She really wanted the Academy to house these and help her create a museum. And for some reason, that never happened. And now, of course, the Academy is going to open their museum this year. The last date I heard was in September. And honestly, all the treasures that I would want to see are gone. I mean, they're just gone. And I'm so sorry that they could never come together and, you know, make her museum in Hollywood, which is what she wanted. I'm not getting her on here. I lost Sally.
Oh,
Sally, are you there?
Yeah, do you hear me now?
I can hear you.
Okay.
I can't see you, but I hear you.
I know. I've set it up so that we can see the pictures that Jim is doing along with what you're saying. So I was wondering if you could show us the harp. Is that the harp you got sitting next to you?
Yes, we can. Okay, so here we go. This is Harpo Marx's harp. Now, how does she have Harpo Marx's harp? How does that happen? Auction catalog is behind you, Jim. So in 2016, Bonhams had an auction, and if you sign up to be on their emails, you get an e-catalog before the catalog is printed. So I got an email one day, and here is their e-catalog for their TCM Bonhams auction. And look what is there. There is a Harpo Marx harp. So I started making some calls, and I wanted to see some pictures other than just what they had in the catalog. You know, that's the only picture I've got to go by. And you see on the bottom of the harp, there are pedals. And I'm going to show you on this harp in just a minute. So we want to know if the pedals work, because the pedals have to work, because those are the sharps and flats. The harp is like a clock. It needs to work. It's a mechanical instrument. It really is. But nobody can answer those questions. So at that point, I'm going to show you these pedals now down here. We're going to show you a little bit about the harp. So the pedals control these levers up at the top. Let me find it. Let me find where you are. Okay. You see that movement? My foot is making that. And so that is a flat, and that is a natural, and that is a sharp. So those pedals are on the bottom of the harp, and they have to work in order for the harp to get to certain notes. We're trying to get the bottom, well, can't see it now anyway. But okay, here we go. Okay, see those pedals? All right, so I was really curious about that, but I never really got an answer if they were functional or not. They are functional, hooray. So this harp was made in 1955. Harpo bought it in 1955. He sold it in 1962. Harpo had a lot of harps. So this particular harp he used on I Love Lucy, he used on a Pepsi commercial, he used on a Red Skelton variety hour he was on. He had many harps, and he used whichever one he was comfortable with. This photograph is Harpo and this harp. This is on a DVD set you can still buy. It's called the Marx Brothers on TV. It's a wonderful set. If you love the Marx Brothers, you would love this set. It has their commercials. It has shows they did after they retired from the movies. They did a lot of television. Of course, we know about Groucho. He had the game show, you know, You Bet Your Life. But Harpo and Chico and the three of them did a lot of television. All right. So I start thinking about bidding on this harp. Let me tell you that if you bid in an auction house, you need to call and arrange to get a phone bidder, because if you try to internet bid, you will lose your item. So I called, I talked to the auction house, we registered, you know, gave them our firstborn child and our blood type and everything else so we could bid on this harp. So about 3 items before the harp is to be auctioned, they call you and they say, I am Joe, I am your phone bidder. And he sees everything on the internet, and he is on the auction floor. So he knows everything that's going on. So he can tell you, okay, you need to bid or hold off, or okay, they're going to come back and bid again. He kind of knows the lay of the land. So just a tip for people who want to get into the auction, you know, business or be on the other side of it, the buyer. So a couple of bids came in, and the harp began to come up a little bit. And then all of a sudden, after about 6 bids, the bidding was over and I won. Well, the auction was in New York. So then, of course, you have to have the harp shipped, and you have to use somebody that the auction house recommends. You can't just use, you know, U-Haul to ship the harp. So anyway, we signed up with those folks. And about 3 weeks later, the harp arrived. And so it came on their truck, and I went out to the street and looked at it. And I noticed that on the truck with the harp, now the harp is in a big trunk, and the trunk is literally 3 times the size of the harp, if you can imagine. It's a wooden trunk. So I looked on the truck, and I can see the harp in the case, and then I can see a big piece of furniture. And I said to the mover, I said, what is that? And he said, we were down in the valley this morning and they didn't claim their dresser. I'm like, what? You drove all the way to the valley and they weren't home? He says, no, they weren't home. I said, well, they have too much money. If you're not home to get your stuff, you know, you don't need it. Anyway, they brought the harp in, I tuned it up, and it's perfect. So the story about this harp, Harpo sold it.
Mary Jane, I wanted to just ask everybody, do you all, when she mentioned I Love Lucy, do you all remember, you know, show of hands or something when Harpo Marx was on I Love Lucy? Yeah. And I was looking at some old things. Was that several different times I think he was on, because there was that mirror scene where he did the mirror with Lucy. And then also he played the harp. He played this harp on the I Love Lucy.
He was on one time. That is one episode.
Okay.
And he only did one episode. that was filmed in 1955, and he had already had a heart attack. He was not in good health, and he only lived until 1964. And his doctor really did not want him to perform. The doctor said, you really need to retire, because in those days, there was not a lot of things they could do to treat a bad heart. You know, there was no bypass, there were no stents, nothing. So Lucy had begged him to come on the show. And he said, Lucy, I want to do this with you, because of course they had been friends. They had made a movie together called Room Service. They were good friends. So finally his doctor gave him the okay, and he was on that one episode. And he does do the mirror scene, and he does play this harp. So the song he played is Take Me Out to the Ball Game. So in classic Harpo Marx fashion, I would like to play that for you. And I'm going to cover my iPad up. Jim's going to get me from this angle. We're going to try Take Me Out to the Ball Game. And let me know. This might be muffled. I'm not sure about that. Okay. See how this sounds. Okay. Are we good?
We couldn't hear you.
Hear that?
Not as good. Can Jim go?
Okay, hold on just a second. Let me read this. Hold on. Okay.
We hear you really well right now.
Okay, yes, I've got this out now. And I think I'm going to put it. You've got that covered? Okay. All right. I'll tell you what, I will do this. No, I won't do anything. I'll just do that. Okay. Here we go. All right, here we go. Harpo Marx's Harp. Take Me Out of the Ball Game.
That was great.
Thank you. Okay, let me get my iPad back here.
Now, let me mention, everybody that listens to harp playing always loves that. I don't know what you call it. Kind of like when you touch every key on the piano. What do you call that?
That is called a glissando.
Okay, well, I'm going to lead into your the other harp story. With her other harp, are we ready to move on to, so we can talk about your, Mary Jane was the favorite harpist to George H.W. Bush. And that's why I mentioned the streaming and all. So you tell us that story and show us the harp that.
All right. That harp is actually in the other room. We cleared it off for this space. But anyway, so, you know, you always think you're going to meet people, you know, when you're at some big fancy gala or something. And sometimes you do, that has happened. But I had a job at the Houstonian. That's the George Bush harp. That's in my other room. So I have a job at the Houstonian. And of course, the Bushes had a residence at the Houstonian for years. Even when he was president, they kept a residence at the Houstonian, which is a big high rise close to the Galleria. in Houston. So the Houstonian Spa, of course, is what you would think. It is attached to the Houstonian, and that's where you go get your nails done and your haircut and all that stuff. So it was in December, and it was the last 15 minutes of the last job in December, which for a harpist is like, oh, thank goodness it's over. So anyway, I'm playing along and I see this really tall man. He was 6'5", and he walks across the lobby of the spa, and I'm thinking, it cannot be. But it was, and he was in a jog suit and his hair was disheveled, and he was on the way back to the shampoo chair. And I thought, okay, I'll sit here and I'll play a little bit longer. And then in a few minutes, the shampoo lady came and she said, did you see who came in? And I said, oh yeah, I think I saw who came in. And she says, well, I know you get off at 5. She said, can you play a little longer? And I said, oh, I think I can do that. So I was playing, and I happened to think, and I pulled out a business card and I said, here, give him my business card. You know, maybe I'll get a gig out of this. So she takes the business card back, and then in a few minutes, the shampoo lady comes back and he signed it. I'm like, well, I don't want it back, you know, but thank you for the autograph. Okay, fine. So anyway, there's my business card that he scrawled on. Okay. So about 30 minutes goes by, and he comes out, he goes over to the desk to pay his tab, and he starts walking toward the harp. And I'm like, oh, he's coming over here. In the meantime, the 2 Secret Service men had come in, and they were sitting right next to me, and Jim had come in to help me load the harp and take it home. And when Jim came in and saw the Secret Service men, his eyes got really big, and he said, what is going on? And I said, it's exactly who you think it is, in the shampoo chair. And he's like, okay. So Jim sits down, and he comes out, and he comes over to the harp, and he's very nice. And he says, I really appreciate you staying and playing for me. He said, actually, it was the most enjoyable haircut I've ever had. I said, well, thank you very much, Mr. President. And he said, you know, I've always wanted to do something. Would you mind? And I said, no, absolutely not. Go right ahead. He comes over to the harp and he does this. And he says, I've always wanted to do that. And I said, my pleasure. Thank you very much. Well, I left a CD, one of my CDs, at the Houstonian, and the lady who cuts his hair gave it to him sometime later. And he wrote me the most beautiful letter, which Jim is going to show you. You always read about Mr. President Bush and his thank you letters. He was a big letter writer. He wrote correspondence all the time. So he was such a nice man. He wrote me a thank you letter, which of course I was thrilled to get. About 5 years later, I worked as a docent at the Museum of Fine Arts. They have a museum house called Rienzi. And President Bush still kept an office and a staff here in Houston. And he had a Christmas party at Rienzi. And of course, I was going to work that day. I had gotten word that he was coming, and so I signed up. So he and Barbara, this time I got to meet her as well. And they were kind enough. They made photographs with all the docents. There were about 20 of us, and they autographed the picture and then mailed it back to us as a Christmas present. It's one of my treasures. And she was so funny. She looked at me and she said, oh, you got the memo about Red. And I said, oh yes, I got the memo. So she was just lovely. And it was a great memory. Great people.
That was amazing. That was one of my favorite stories.
It was really, really fun. Totally unexpected. You know, you never know when you play the harp, and you just don't know. You know, it's my favorite quote is that quote that says, life is 99% showing up. And I have to tell you, there have been times when I didn't feel like playing. I didn't want to get out of bed and go play. I had a migraine, but invariably that's the time when something like this happens. And you're so glad that you were able to just show up, just be there.
So you've had a couple of other good, fun stories. Can you share a few of your celebrity stories? The Gene Tierney, sure. Burt Reynolds.
Yes, I'm sure that many of you remember Gene Tierney, the beautiful movie star who was, of course, known for the movie Laura. Well, Gene Tierney's story is a little bit tragic in that she suffered from depression. she had her eldest daughter was born with severe birth defects because Miss Tierney had contracted measles when she was pregnant. And because of this, her daughter was institutionalized. And Jean Tierney spent the rest of her life working with the March of Dimes, who of course funded the research for birth defects and later on, of course, the polio vaccine. So when I was a senior in high school, we were invited to sing. I went to the high school for the performing arts and I was a vocal major. I learned to play the harp there, but I was a vocal major first. So we were going to sing for this gala. We go to this gala and we're out on stage and we're doing our thing. And unbeknownst to me, Miss Tierney has gone to the ladies' room. And my mother is sitting in the ladies' room with all of our purses and shoes and clothes. And Miss Tierney says to my mother, "Who do you belong to?" And my mother said, "Well, my daughter Mary Jane is one of the singers." And Miss Tierney says, "Just a minute." So she goes out, she gets a maid at the hotel, and the maid comes back and babysits with the clothes and the purses and everything else. And Miss Tierney told my mother, she said, "You're going to go sit at my table because when I went to Hollywood, my mother had to sit in restrooms and, janitorial rooms and all kinds of things. You're going to come sit at my table." So she takes my mother out to her table. Of course, I don't know any of this because, I'm on stage with my group. We go back to the ladies' room and my mother's not there. And I asked the maid, "Where's my mother?" And the maid says, "She's out at the table with Miss Tierney." I'm like, oh my God, my mother has lost her mind. And of course, my mother came from work. She's not dressed in gala clothes. She just came from work. She was an insurance secretary. I go out to the venue, into the ballroom, and there is Jean Tierney. And she is just beautiful. This was in 1974. And sitting next to Jean Tierney is my mother. And I look at my mother and my mother is just shaking her head. And Miss Tierney was very nice. She said, "Oh, we enjoyed your group and tell me about your school." And she was lovely. And then she said, "Mary Jane, I'd like you to meet Dr. Jonas Salk." And there he was. And I have to tell you, that was a moment when, as a kid, my generation was the first to benefit from the polio vaccine. And all I could think of was how much this man had contributed. He looked a little bit like the composer Aaron Copland. He was very, very unassuming, a classic researcher, but he was very nice. So that was a real thrill. And that was because of the kindness of Jean Tierney. Another funny story I have is about Burt Reynolds. I worked at a restaurant called the Brownstone. And the Brownstone was a very nice, fancy restaurant at the edge of River Oaks, which is the richest part of Houston at that time. And it was pouring. It was a Thursday night and it was pouring, raining cats and dogs. And I told Jim, I said, "I cannot believe anybody's going to be at the restaurant tonight." Well, guess what? I get to the restaurant and they tell me, "Mary Jane, we're going to move you out of the main dining room and we're going to put you in one of the party rooms because we have special guests coming." And I said, "Oh, who is it?" "Somebody with the Houston Oilers." I mean, really, I was like, "Oh, really?" Well, then in about 10 minutes, the king of Hollywood walked in. He was wearing a pair of blue jeans and a red shirt. He looked like he just walked off the screen of Smokey and the Bandit. This was about 3 years after Smokey and the Bandit. And he came in, he was directing a dinner theater here in Houston. And he came in with the other actor, Robert Fuller. Robert Fuller was on Emergency, you might remember. And so they came in and there he was. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And I couldn't believe it because, again, the weather was so horrendous. But 99% of life is showing up. Just saying. He was just wonderful. Well, that was Thursday night. He came back on Monday night. The owner of the restaurant called me at work at my day job Monday. I didn't play on Mondays. And she said, "Oh, you need to come back tonight because he's already asked for you." I'm like, okay, I'll be there. He was very kind. And, he gave a lot of interviews where he talked about his aunt had an autograph page that Bing Crosby, she had met Bing Crosby, and his aunt had that page on her coffee table under glass. And he always said that he respected his fans and he always would sign for his fans. And that was certainly true. He was very nice. He also tipped very well. His favorite song was The Days of Wine and Roses. I always remembered that. He wanted to hear that song. All right. All right.
Now, most of us here, we love, we thought he was just so great, Burt Reynolds, but there's another person that stole your heart, and he's from Gone with the Wind and many other movies also. So tell us all about your love affair with Leslie Howard.
Well, Leslie Howard, of course, was in Gone with the Wind, but he never wanted to be in Gone with the Wind. He told David Selznick, unless you pay me $75,000, you can forget it because I am not interested. Well, Selznick had tested many other actors, but the tests were so bad, Selznick could see that Leslie Howard was going to be the guy. And Leslie Howard in 1939 was approaching his 50th birthday. And he knew that his days as a leading man were going by fast, and he wanted to direct and produce. So he told Selznick, he said, if you pay me $75,000 for Gone with the Wind, I'll do it. But I have to have another project that I could put my name on. Well, of course, Selznick had a lot of projects that hadn't been filmed yet. And one of them was Intermezzo. David Selznick had bought the property Intermezzo, and he had also brought over the star of the Swedish version, who was Ingrid Bergman. So here we go. While Leslie Howard is making Gone with the Wind, he and Ingrid Bergman start to make Intermezzo. Now, what you're looking at now is something I got last year. This is Leslie Howard's presentation script from David O. Selznick, autographed. It says, for Leslie, and the line, come home, Holger. Holger was Leslie Howard's character. DOS, that's David O. Selznick, 1939. So this was the presentation script that Leslie was given from David Selznick. And interestingly enough, this is what Leslie wanted. He wanted this credit, and you're going to see it right here in just a minute. It's going to be associate producer credit. And so having that credit on that movie enabled Leslie Howard to go back to his beloved England and form his own production company and make propaganda movies. Now you can see kind of what a script looks like a little bit. Okay, so, and then, oh, here we go. Here's the credit page. Associate producer, Leslie Howard. This is the linchpin of Gone with the Wind right here. So that's why I wanted this item. When it came up for sale last year, I'm like, bingo, that's what I want. Because so much of Gone with the Wind is tied up with this. If you've seen this movie, it was her first American movie. Of course, she just took off like a rocket. It was his last American movie. He went back to Great Britain. He was only in Great Britain a week before Germans declared war on Great Britain. Now you'll see these photos. They are literally pasted in this script. Very interesting. And there you see close shot. You see the long shot, you see the ad libs, you see Holger, what he's saying. Very interesting to have that piece. And then I also own some other items of Leslie Howard, which we're going to show you. Leslie Howard goes back. Oh, wait a minute, I have to stop right there. Okay. So one of the films that Leslie Howard is known for is The Scarlet Pimpernel, 1935. He co-starred with Merle Oberon. But did you know that Robert Osborne from TCM had a friendship with many of these leading ladies? And this picture was left to Robert Osborne from Merle Oberon. This is autographed to Merle Oberon from Leslie Howard. Sink me, only 3 more days, Lady Blakely. I was only kidding, darling Leslie. So this photograph came out of an auction. Robert Osborne had some nieces up in Washington, and I got wind of this auction, and I began to look at this catalog, and there were hundreds of pictures that Merle Oberon had given to Robert Osborne. from many of her movies. There were 3 that were of Leslie Howard that were autographed to her, and I bought those 3. But Robert Osborne had a huge collection of photographs that had been given to him by some of these leading ladies that he became close friends with. Okay, so that's a treasure right there. And then we're going to go over to some Leslie Howard costumes. These came out of the successive Debbie Reynolds auctions. We're going to show you 2 costumes now. They are both from Berkeley Square, 1934. And let me say once again, no expense spared on these costumes. The green is a green velvet. Go back to the green velvet real quick. Okay, green velvet, and then it's got a taffeta embroidered, hand embroidered vest, gold buttons. You know, these movies were made in black and white. Okay, you know, you never saw this detail. Maybe you could see the flower detail a little bit in a long shot, but you never got this close up. And then we're going to show you another one, the blue teal. We're going to show you that one. That's also from Berkeley Square. Look at the detail in this costume. This originally was a teal velvet. Of course, it's faded. It's lost the matting, but there are those tassels. There's that gold braid. There's that moire taffeta vest with that embroidery and those mother of pearl buttons. Again, they spared no expense on these costumes. And Jim will show you pictures of Leslie now in both of those costumes. But, you know, when you talk about how, and look at that, the original lace, oh my gosh, French lace on that cuff, still intact. So people say to me, Mary Jane, what are you going to do with these things? You know, I say, I'm going to build a pyramid like King Tut. What else can I do? Because these costumes have outlasted the actor, and they're going to outlast me for sure. There he is in the green costume right there. And that's Heather Angel. And she also did voicing for Walt Disney. She was the voice of Alice in Wonderland for the animated Walt Disney feature. She did a lot of voices at the Disney studio. And there he is in the blue costume. Leslie Howard, of course, went back to England. When the war started, he volunteered to be in the Ministry of Information. He was on a mission as a spy to Lisbon. They think that he was a courier. They're pretty sure that he met with Franco, Generalissimo Franco, and delivered messages from Churchill. But the official records of exactly what he was doing are sealed until 2055. He definitely was an agent. He lost his life. He got on a civilian KLM airliner in Lisbon to come back home to England, and the Luftwaffe shot it down over the Bay of Biscay, which is one of the deepest bodies of water on Earth. No survivors. Nothing was ever found. They did photograph the wreckage for the Luftwaffe. And when I met his son later, I met his son and daughter. I was lucky enough to become friends with them. And the son said that his mother had received those photos. So anyway, he gave his life for his country. He was a patriot. And when people confuse him with Ashley Wilkes, you know, I just got to say, he was not Ashley Wilkes. He was far and above. There's one more thing I'm going to show you. You know, there's a word called fan. We're all fans of Gone with the Wind. But, you know, the word fan actually comes from the word fanatic. So here is a fanatic piece. This is Leslie Howard's train suitcase. So in those days, you would get on the train with your luggage. And if you were wealthy, you would have a train case. And it would have all of your bottles of cologne or powder or lotion, and it would have your brushes. So this belonged to Leslie Howard. You'll see his monogram on the brushes and on the bottles. They are silver. They are stamped silver. And there's even that long one right behind the brush there is for a toothbrush. There's a long bottle back there. So there's his, yeah, there you go. There's the toothbrush bottle. Just in case you want to know. And then next to it, right next to it is his card case, his business card case. So that is a fanatic piece right there with Leslie Howard's DNA right there.
That's
Are people
incredible.
asleep? Are
That is
y'all asleep?
incredible.
Are you
Nope.
asleep yet?
Nobody's asleep. Everybody's like, we're amazed. I want to make sure everybody has, if anybody has a question, you have a chance to ask her. So if you know how to use that little hand raising sign, maybe it would help us recognize that you have a question. But one thing I wanted to have you mention, that you and also Kathleen, I think who's on here, you all got to go out to Culver Studios in California. Is that right? Okay, can you
Yes.
tell that story, Mary Jane?
Yes, yes. These wonderful Gone with the Wind people. It was a Gone with the Wind junket that the lady who ran the museum, the Road to Terra Museum in Jonesboro, had planned. And wow, were we lucky? We were so lucky.
We're very lucky.
Culver Studios is where Gone with the Wind was made, but it has a long history. It was originally Thomas Ince's studio. He was a silent film director and producer. He died under mysterious circumstances. Then David O. Selznick bought Culver Studios, and he kept it for a while and made all of his movies there, not just Gone with the Wind. Can I say King Kong, Rebecca? I mean, at least a dozen, fine movies that we know.
Right.
Then after Selznick vacated it and retired, some redhead and a Cuban owned it, and they renamed it Desilu. So that was the Desilu where The Untouchables were filmed. Can I say Mayberry started at Culver City Studios. That's where they filmed Andy Griffith's show. Danny Thomas, it became the Desilu Studios. So we got to go to that wonderful place. And my impression, and Kathleen, I'd like to know yours. I was amazed at what they did with that size of a studio, because it was small compared to these huge backlots of MGM and Warner Brothers and
Universal. Because remember, we went out to Universal and it was huge compared to it. But yeah, it was. I mean, that was real. I had only been out to Hollywood one time before, and of course I was on my own, so all I could see was the front of it. But that was good enough. This was a great opportunity in 2006. So this was a gathering to celebrate Olivia de Havilland's 90th birthday. That was the object of the trip out there. But the one thing I still remember from our afternoon at the studios in Culver City there was the luncheon on the lawn.
Yes.
The luncheon we arrived and there were these huge white tents set up on the front lawn of the studio facing the main street. And it was for us. We were having a buffet lunch, and then all of a sudden there was Ann Rutherford coming to meet us. And that was a total surprise. We had no idea she was going to join us for lunch that afternoon. So
it was awesome. And I still have those photographs. And I met a girl who lives, we're still friends. We still communicate. She lives in New Hampshire. And her name is Cindy. And so Cindy and I rented a car, and Cindy drove me out to where Westwood Cemetery, where a lot of big stars are buried. We both really love Dean Martin. And she says, hey, do you want to go out and see Westwood? I said, I would love. So Westwood Cemetery, is like between office buildings. It's in the Westwood part of Los Angeles there. And literally that cemetery is tiny, but it is where Marilyn Monroe, Dean Martin, Natalie Wood, Oscar Levant, Mickey Rooney, tons of people are there. I know people are dying to get in, that old joke. Anyway, so we went out there and had a really interesting afternoon on that trip. And then one thing I remember too is when we went to the Queen Mary on that trip. Mm-hmm. And especially Leslie Howard, but all these British stars, they came over on the Queen Mary back and forth. And so we went down to Long Beach and got to see the Queen Mary and had dinner on the Queen Mary. I mean, that was awesome.
Yes, yes.
So I mean, that trip to me, and of course the Olivia de Havilland rolled into all that was something else, but the whole trip was like a dream. And when I tell people, oh, I went to Culver Studios, they're like, you did not. I'm like, yeah, we did. Because, it's never been open for tours. And now Amazon owns it. And they have torn down almost all those sound stages. The main front building is still there where Selznick's office was, you know, that looks like Terra, the facade, basically. It's still there, but they have torn down those studios where those television shows and movies were made. And that's a shame. And I don't know, again, the reality of why that happened, but Amazon owns it now. So
we should actually do sometime a whole talk about that, all the Gone with the Wind stuff and your all's trip, because that was pretty amazing.
That trip, yeah. I've got stories, I've got pictures, I've got a whole, you know.
It would be great. It's actually quite a coincidence to see the people, Mary Jane's in Texas and Kathleen's in Detroit, and to think that they randomly, they're not best friends or anything, that they randomly ended up taking that awesome trip and knowing each other. Now I see somebody with their hands up. Deb, you have a question?
No, I just wanted to say thank you so much. I am a total Harpo Marx fan. One of the few books that I own is Harpo Speaks. I read it about once a year. I love him.
Wonderful.
And I had just put down My Girls by Todd Fisher, talking about Carrie and Debbie. I thought, I've read enough, you know. But when you mentioned that, I thought, well, I got to finish that before I take it back to the library. I wanted to ask you, you said Todd was so kind to you. Did you see any of the affinity that Debbie and Carrie had for each other at that point?
You know, Todd was her right hand.
Yeah.
Todd had organized. Now, Debbie and Todd had cataloged these costumes. And between the three auctions, I would say there were probably 2,500 costumes. But Debbie and Todd had cataloged these because when they got them from MGM in 1970, it was a mess. Now, some of these costumes, most of these costumes will have the name of the person who wore the costume written in the label, okay?
Mm-hmm.
But as to cataloging what film, what year, blah, 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 Todd and Debbie did all that.
They did, really? Wow.
They did, because MGM was just a mess and they couldn't wait to liquidate it. Honestly, they couldn't have cared less. So
he goes into great detail about how she just was frustrated at every turn. It was crazy, but I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, very, very sad. That day, when Carrie came in, I couldn't believe it was Carrie Fisher by her appearance. She was so different, you know. And again, that was 2011, okay?
Mm-hmm.
So when she came in, and I remember one thing about her, she was, and they had just come out on the market. In the room where we were watching the auction, she was smoking an electronic cigarette.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, who does that? You know? But again, okay. And so she was chain smoking this electric cigarette thing. And I was like, oh my goodness. Debbie talked, and of course, Carrie sat on the other side. And then Todd's girlfriend, Kathleen, was on Debbie's right hand. And then Carrie was on her left. And Debbie, you know, here they are auctioning off her treasures one by one. And you talk about a stiff upper lip. That could not have been easy.
Yeah.
But she was something else. And she did talk a lot to Todd back and forth. She reached over to me and said, you know, who are you and who do you collect? And we talked a little bit about Leslie Howard. And Debbie said to me, I loved Leslie Howard. I said, well, I liked Leslie Howard too. You know, and obviously she did, because she had these costumes from different movies. But I was so surprised at Carrie smoking through the whole thing. And Debbie sat there the whole time. This thing was all day and into the night. They auctioned off over probably close to 400 items that day. And she sat there. She took a couple of potty breaks, but I'm telling you, she was there the whole time.
She was a trooper.
She was a trooper. And when Mr. South Korea, when he bought Marilyn's dress, which was the big ticket item of the day, she stopped the auction after he bid and, you know, sold. And she said, I want to meet that gentleman. And he came to the front with his interpreter, and she wanted to meet him and make pictures with him because he had bought over 50% of that auction that day. And he came, I've got to tell you, his interpreter spoke very little English. He spoke no English. And all I could think of was Gone with the Wind. there they go. They're going out of the country. We'll never see them again.
One more quick question. What was
Sure.
the purpose? What was the purpose of the light box in front of Debbie?
I think to make her look younger.
Okay.
If you look at those pictures, can we pull those up?
Yeah.
He's pulling those up. We'll show a few of those, but I have a whole bunch of those pictures. They came and they put this light box on the back of her seat, and I kind of thought it was a monitor. I thought maybe they had a monitor hooked up backstage or whatever. But anyway, you'll see. Now you can see how bright that light is on her. Of course, she was camera ready, as they used to say in the movies. She was camera ready. She could have set her foot on the soundstage. She went up there and made a few comments before the auction started, and she was literally wiping tears away when she talked. And then she went and sat in the audience. But she was a dear, dear person. And Harpo Speaks is one of my favorite books. And if you have not read Harpo Speaks, it is a wonderful autobiography, and it's got some really funny moments. And
it
I have to
does.
tell you, Harpo Marx was all about his family. He adopted 4 children. He and his wife could not have children. He married rather late. He was into his 40s when he married. He was married one time and to Susan Fleming. She had been in the movies very briefly, but she decided that was not for her. They met sort of on a blind date, and the rest is history. They stayed married for years. In fact, Harpo actually passed away on their wedding anniversary. He was in the middle of heart surgery, and he passed away on their anniversary. But they adopted 4 children. I've come to know one of their children really well. Bill was the oldest. And because my teacher was so instrumental to so many of her students, she taught literally 5 generations of harp students. So after she died, we got together in the harp chapter and said, let's get a scholarship named for our teacher, Mildred Milligan. So I had heard that Bill Marx did a show with a harpist named Carol McLaughlin. Carol McLaughlin was the professor at University of Arizona, and they were doing a show together about the Marx brothers. Bill Marx went to Juilliard as a pianist. So he did the Chico part and she did the Harpo part. So we brought them to Houston and raised the first monies for our scholarship fund. And he was delightful. And he said to me, I said, tell me about your dad. I said, tell me what was your dad really like? And he said, my dad was exactly that same person you see on the screen. And my Uncle Groucho was the same person you see on the screen too. He said, my mother did not like Groucho, and my mother didn't really love when Groucho came over, but my father loved Groucho. And Harpo and Groucho had really saved Chico's life because Chico gambled every penny he ever made. And Harpo and Groucho really took care of Chico in his older years and even paid for his funeral. Wow. So they were a very close-knit family, but Harpo was, everything I have read about that man is so complimentary and everybody loved him.
That's great. Thanks for the questions, Deb. Does anybody else have a question? We're going to let Mary Jane go in a few minutes, but I want to show you I want her to show us one more thing before she goes. If you have a question, put the little hand up or wave at us or something, because I try to keep these things at about an hour, but she was so interesting. Obviously, we're still going, but I want to remind you for next week, our talk is probably going to be aimed at people from St. Louis or Cardinal fans, because Rob Raines is having a virtual pep rally the night before the first home game.
Cool.
Pep rally, and we're going to have prizes, and we've got
her to come back and sing "Take Me Out to the Ball Game."
So that should be a lot of fun. I'm going to check and see if there's anybody else with a question. All right. Before you go, she's just so interesting. So before you go, can you show us your compact collection?
Sure. So not that I needed another collection. I'm just going to say that. So let me walk over here. Let me turn this. Here we go. Come on. You got it? Okay. Oh, there's Leslie Howard. Imagine that. Look, here's some more Leslie Howard. Oh my gosh. There's never enough Leslie Howard. Okay. Contacts. Okay. Here we go. Let me put this up. So I'm always fascinated with these compacts. They're sort of little pieces of artwork. And so I've picked up a couple, as you can see.
My goodness.
Yeah. So here we have here we have the Queen Mary, which I bought on that California trip in that gift shop on the Queen Mary. That's a vintage compact from the late 40s. And I bought it on that trip right there. There is the Queen Mary. And then we've got a charm bracelet here, which is all about Grauman's Chinese Theater, things that I've picked up over our visits to California and going to the TCM Festival. Let's see, the compact that started this collection, let me put my finger on it here. Okay, the compact that started this collection was my mother's, and she and my father went to Cuba. And 10 months later, they had a daughter named Mary Jane. So there you go. There's Cuba. And then we go over here. Here is the Trilon and First Sphere from the World's Fair, 1939. And then here's the Chicago World's Fair, 1933. And my father went to both of these. He worked for the Southern Pacific and rode all over the country free. And so he would always tell me about visiting these two World Fairs. And then here is an interesting one. This is Stardust in music notation. For goodness sake. On the top of a compact, just in case you forget your music at home, you could read off your compact. Here's one called Golden Gesture. This was made by Volupte. They made thousands of compacts, but the hand was called Gesture. And so there's the hand compact. There's a little piano back here. You can see.
Wow.
And yeah, I think they're interesting. I just think they're fascinating little pieces of art. So anyway, I don't know. That's kind of where that is. So we're always looking for the next one, or whatever. So some of these are. Oh, this little box back here, you can see it. This was something that belonged to Lucille Ball. It is actually a cigarette holder. It would hold a package of cigarettes. And I purchased this from the Chautauqua Society, and she had given it to them to auction off up there in Jamestown. One of my bucket trips, I want to go to Jamestown and see the Lucy and Desi Museum up in Jamestown. But the Chautauqua Museum was raising money for the museum, and they auctioned that off. So that did belong to Lucy. Let's see, what else do we have? We have a stork club over here. And then the last one, just in case you forget what day it is or what time you're supposed to be there, this compact has a little clock, and then it has all these little things around the dial to remind you, okay, I'm getting my hair done, or I'm going out to tea, or I'm going to go to the theater. That's a British compact. Okay.
All right. I appreciate you for coming. I appreciate everything you did. And
thank you, Sally.
Thanks to everybody. I see that Bernie and Sammy joined us later, so I wanted to say hi to them too. And thanks to everybody that came out, and we've had a good night tonight. I'm sure everybody.
Thank you so much. It was wonderful.
Everybody.
Very enjoyable.
We'll be posting the next ones.
Yeah. No,
My pleasure. I'll be waiting for the Wendy reunion. I'll be waiting for that.
We will get Kathleen on that. We will do a Gone with the Wind thing. So, all right. Have a good night, everybody.
Thank you for arranging this, Sally.
Jim did a great job. Thanks to Jim too.
Good night.
Good night.